The first mistake was picking up the pen. The second was not asking what the paper said before he scratched his name across a dot. By the time the ink dried, every set of eyes in Dry Creek was fixed on him, and an old woman in a black bonnet was grinning like she'd just won a gold claim. The day had started like any other in the town square, hot wind kicking dust into the teeth, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoing down the boardwalk, and the smell of whiskey wafting from the saloon. Before noon, standing on the steps of the courthouse, Gray Wolf towering, bare-chested beneath a beaded vest, black hair loose to his shoulders, looked out of place among the townsfolk. He'd only come because the sheriff claimed there was a treaty that needed his signature, one that would protect his people's grazing land from the cattle barons, but the sheriff wasn't at the top of those steps now. Judge Hollister was, and Judge Hollister had a talent for twisting the law into knots that only benefited the rich or the cunning. Beside the judge stood Mrs. Matilda Brewster, 70 if she was a day, her eyes sharp as nails under that bonnet, her gnarled hands clutching a bouquet of dried wildflowers. She was the wealthiest widow in 3 counties, owning half the ranch land west of the creek and all the water rights that came with it. "Just sign here, son," the judge had said, sliding the paper across the wooden podium. "This'll settle the dispute nice and legal." Gray Wolf glanced at the neat lines of black ink words he couldn't read. He had never learned the English letters, and the sheriff had sworn someone would explain them. But the sheriff wasn't here. Only the townsfolk gathered in a half circle, whispering and smirking. He pressed the pen down anyway, and the judge announced in a booming voice, "By the authority vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I now pronounce you man and wife." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Matilda Brewster beamed, looping her arm through Gray Wolf's as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Gray Wolf's jaw tightened, his muscles rippling under the sun. He didn't know what a wife meant in their law, but he knew a trap when he stepped into one. From the back of the crowd, a rancher spat tobacco and called out, "Guess you married into money, Chief." The laughter stung worse than any bullet. He pulled his arm free, but Matilda's grip was iron. "Don't you be foolish, young man," she hissed under her breath, low enough that only he heard. "You've got more trouble than you realize, and I just might be the only thing standing between you and a noose." That stopped him cold. Trouble had been brewing for months, cattlemen cutting fences on tribal land, merchants refusing to sell to his people, whispers of soldiers riding in from Fort Garland. If this paper had tied his fate to hers, then maybe she wasn't just an old woman playing a cruel joke. Maybe this was a move in a bigger game. The judge rapped his gavel. "Ceremony's over. Now, folks, let's give the happy couple some space." The crowd dispersed slowly, eyes still following him, grins still curling at the corners of mouths. Gray Wolf didn't move. Dust swirled around his boots as Matilda leaned closer. "Meet me at my ranch by sundown. We've got work to do, and you'd better be ready for a fight." She turned and walked away, her back straight despite the years, leaving him standing in the sun, the signed paper still clutched in his hand. He looked down at the page. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the seal stamped at the bottom. It was the same one that marked land deeds and property claims. Whatever this was, it wasn't about marriage. It was about power. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was in the middle of it. The crowd outside the courthouse didn't go back to their business. They lingered, whispering and smirking, as if the dusty little town had suddenly turned into a carnival. "Married to old Mabel." "Ha!" someone cackled from the boardwalk. "Guess the warrior likes M with gray hair and a cane." The warrior, known to his people as Tahu, the Hawk, ignored the taunts. His jaw was tight and his eyes stayed locked on the parchment. In his hands, the seal of the county court was stamped deep into the paper, and in scrawled ink, right under his name, was the phrase, "Lawful husband to Mabel Annette Jenkins." He hadn't meant to sign it. He thought he was agreeing to a trade contract, timber rights on his people's land in exchange for cash to feed the starving elders. But the judge, a slick little man named Caldwell, had slid the wrong paper in front of him. Whether it was a cruel joke or a deliberate scheme, Tahu couldn't yet tell. Mabel, for her part, didn't look amused either. The old woman, hunched and leaning on a carved cane, squinted up at him like he was a bear that had wandered into her kitchen. "Boy, I don't need a husband," she muttered, "but I reckon you don't need a wife neither. So what in the blazes is this?" The judge just chuckled from his seat, tapping his gavel for no reason at all. "Well, folks, it's legal now. Ain't no tacking it back without a fee and a court hearing. Guess you two better get used to each other." Tahu's eyes narrowed. He stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the judge's desk. "You made a mistake." Caldwell's grin didn't falter. "Mistake or fate? That's for the good Lord to decide. But if you want it undone, you'll need $200 for the annulment, and to get in line behind the cattle disputes, the water rights, and the church roof petition. $200. Tahu didn't even have 20. His people's coffers were empty, their hunting grounds shrinking. Winter was creeping closer, and now he'd have to deal with this humiliation. The murmurs outside grew louder. Town gossips were already painting wild stories that the warrior had married Mabel for her rumored gold stash, or that she'd roped him in to guard her land. None of it was true, but in a town like this, the truth was just a pebble drowning. In a river of lies. Mabel suddenly tapped her cane hard on the wooden floor, making the whole room go quiet. "All of you shut your mouths," she barked. "I may be old, but I ain't deaf, and I sure as hell ain't a fool. I didn't plan this mess, and neither did he. So if any of you got something to say about it, you best be ready to say it to my shotgun." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. People backed off a step. Tahu studied her for a moment, the stooped shoulders, the lined face, the fire in her eyes. She might have been 70, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd survived far worse than gossip. Still, Caldwell's smirk stayed in place. "Court's adjourned. Good luck, newlyweds." Tahu turned sharply, striding out of the building without another word. But the old woman followed her, cane thumping against the planks. Outside, the street was lined with faces. Tahu mounted his horse, but before he could leave, Mabel called after him. "You're coming with me," she said flatly. "Like it or not, you're tied to me now, and if you think you're just gonna vanish into the hills, you got another thing coming. We got a bigger problem than this paper." He stared down at her. "What problem?" Her voice dropped low, sharp as a rattlesnake's warning. "The same folks who tricked you into signing this are the same ones trying to steal my land. And if they get mine, yours is next." The wind picked up, scattering dust between them. In that moment, Tahu understood. This was no joke. The marriage was a trap, yes, but it was also a line in the sand. Someone had just declared war on both of them. The old woman, Mrs. Agatha Turner, as she loudly introduced herself, had a voice like gravel dragged across a tin roof. "You signed it," she barked, slamming her cane into the courthouse steps. "And by the laws of this town, you're my husband. Ain't no backing out." The warrior, Koda, stood motionless. His broad chest rose and fell with the steady breath of a man who knew a fight when he saw one, though this one was stranger than any battlefield. Around them, laughter bubbled like an open wound. Sheriff Delaney tipped his hat back, grinning. "Sorry, son. Once it's in ink, it's as good as carved in stone. Best you get used to married life." Koda's eyes narrowed. His hands scarred and hardened from years of gripping spear and bow clenched at his sides. He'd signed the paper because the clerk said it was a release for land rights. part of an agreement to let his people hunt deer in the high plains again. The paper was thick with words in the English tongue words he had not been taught. Now, he stood bound to an agreement he didn't understand. Mrs. Turner took a step closer, her thin frame shaking not from weakness but from sheer stubborn will. Don't think for 1 second I'm letting you run off. You're mine now, and I've got plans. The crowd chuckled again. Coda's gaze swept over the faces, men with calloused hands gripping whiskey bottles, women peering from shaded porches, and children whispering behind their mothers' skirts. He was no stranger to humiliation, but this was a trap. Someone had said it. He spoke low, his voice deep as rolling thunder. Who told you to bring this paper to me? Mrs. Turner's lips twitched into something between a smirk and a grimace. Nobody had to tell me. The council wanted my land taxes settled. I wanted someone strong to handle the troublemakers squatting on my property. The law says if a man marries a widow, he's responsible for her debts and safety. So you'll do. It was no mistake. It was a setup. Coda stepped back, his moccasins whispering against the dusty boards. The pieces clicked together. This wasn't just a joke. This was leverage. Someone wanted him tied down, busy, unable to ride out and meet with his own people. Someone wanted his back turned. You've taken what was not given, he said. That's theft. Her chin lifted. That's the law. The sheriff's hand drifted near his revolver. Not to threaten yet, but as a reminder of where the key to power lay in this town. A hot wind blew down Main Street, sending grit stinging into Coda's eyes. He didn't blink. Mrs. Turner leaned on her cane, eyeing him with the satisfaction of someone who just cornered a wild animal. We start tomorrow. My ranch is 10 miles north. Fences need mending, wolves been sniffing the henhouse, and my hired hands quit 2 months ago. You'll earn your keep. Coda said nothing. He simply turned his head toward the sun, feeling its weight on his shoulders like an old memory. There was no victory here in fighting now. Not in front of this many witnesses, but there was something else. He caught it in the corner of his vision. On the far edge of the crowd, a young messenger boy darted between the bystanders, shoving a folded scrap of paper into the hand of a man in a long black coat. The man read it, nodded once, and disappeared into the saloon. Koda knew that coat. He'd seen it riding the ridge 2 nights ago, watching his people's campfires from a distance. This was no accident. Mrs. Turner tapped her cane. You'll ride with me tomorrow morning, bright and early. Unless you'd rather I tell the sheriff you're refusing the duties of a lawful husband. Coda's jaw tightened. I'll ride, he said finally, voice steady. The sheriff chuckled, satisfied. The crowd began to drift away, already hungry for the next spectacle. Koda stood still until the last footsteps faded. The paper Mrs. Turner had forced into his hand crackled in the wind. He didn't need to read it to know what it meant. Someone had bound him to a task that would drag him straight into a fight he didn't choose. And if they thought he would play along forever, they had no idea what kind of warrior they'd just trapped. The morning sun was barely a pale smear over the mesa when Whitehawk was already awake. Sleep had been short, filled with the quiet creak of the old woman's rocking chair and the whisper of her voice as she spoke to herself in the dark. She was sitting there now, wrapped in a wool shawl, sipping coffee from a tin cup like she'd been awake all night. You ride with me today, she said without turning her head. You'll see why my life ain't for the weak. He strapped his knife to his thigh, tightened the rawhide belt at his waist, and followed her without a word. The town's early riser shopkeepers sweeping their porches, miners heading toward the canyon stared as the unlikely pair crossed the street. Her wagon waited in the dust, pulled by 2 bony mules with eyes like they'd seen more winters than her. By the time they rattled out of town, the air smelled of mesquite and dry sage. The trail cut between low sandstone hills, the ruts deep, from decades of wheels. White Hawk kept his eyes moving, noting fresh hoof prints and boot tracks in the dust. After an hour, the woman broke the silence. "People think I'm just a worn-out widow with a shack full of cats," she said, her voice hard. "But I've buried 2 husbands, fought off rustlers, and outlived every man who's tried to cheat me." White Hawk glanced at her. There was no tremble in her hands, no hesitation in her words. She wasn't boasting. She was giving him a warning. When the canyon narrowed, they passed a bleached cattle skull nailed to a fence post. The air felt heavier here. A carrion bird circled overhead. "That's the line," she muttered. "Other sides where men vanish." They reached her small outpost, 3 weather-beaten sheds, a corral, and a water pump. She climbed down, moving faster than he expected for her age. "Load the crates," she ordered, nodding toward the shed. He stepped inside, and the smell hit him: gun oil, leather, and tobacco. The crates were stenciled with symbols he recognized: black powder, shells, and rifle parts. He turned slowly. "These supplies, they're for more than farming." The old woman's eyes glinted. "I don't farm, I deal. And there's a man who doesn't like that." Before he could respond, a distant echo rolled through the canyon, a single rifle. Crack. Then another. "Inside," she snapped, yanking him back toward the wagon. White Hawk ducked low, scanning the ridges. Dust plumes rose on both sides, riders closing in. A dozen, maybe more. They mounted up fast, the mules straining as the wagon lurched down the trail. The attackers came into view, bandits in ragged coats, their faces hidden by scarves. They whooped and fired, bullets whining past. White Hawk grabbed his bow from the wagon bed. He drew and loosed in one smooth motion, the arrow finding a rider's shoulder and spinning him into the dust. The old woman cackled, not in fear, but in some wild joy. "Haven't had company like this in years." The chase tore through the canyon, every hoofbeat pounding in his ears. White Hawk fired again, then dropped low as a bullet splintered the wagon rail near his head. The mules screamed, the trail narrowing between walls of stone dot up ahead. A landslide blocked half the path. The woman didn't slow. She cracked the reins and the wagon tilted, wheels groaning as they scraped past. One bandit tried to cut them off, riding alongside. White Hawk lunged, caught the man's arm, and ripped him from the saddle. The man hit the ground hard, his gun skittering into the rocks. Finally, the attackers fell back, their shouts fading. The wagon rolled on, the only sound the rasp of the mules and the old woman's slow, steady breathing. When they reached open country again, she turned to him. "You signed my papers, warrior. That means you signed for my enemies too." White Hawk wiped the dust from his face. He didn't answer because he knew she was right out somewhere behind them in that shadowed canyon. The riders were regrouping, and they wouldn't stop. The canyon narrowed until the walls rose so steep and jagged they seemed to scrape the clouds. The air smelled of hot stone and dust, and the sound of the mules' hooves echoed like war drums. Greyhawk's sharp eyes scanned every ledge, every shadow, knowing this was the perfect place for an ambush. Beside him, Mrs. Hargrove clung to the wagon side, her knuckles white. Her hat had flown off miles back, and her silver hair whipped wildly in the wind. She didn't speak, didn't have to. They both knew they were in enemy ground. Behind them, faint at first but growing louder, came the pounding of hooves. Greyhawk glanced over his shoulder. 5 riders, masked in black scarves, their rifles glinting in the sun. The lead rider fired a shot that ricocheted off the canyon wall with a metallic scream. Greyhawk jerked the reins, guiding the mules toward a bend. The wagon's wheels bounced violently over loose rocks, threatening to tip. "They're gaining," Mrs. Hargrove muttered, her voice steady despite the danger. "You got a plan, warrior?" "Yes," he said, scanning ahead. "But you won't like it." A few hundred yards ahead, the canyon split. One path continued straight and narrow. The other veered sharply toward a rocky outcrop where the cliffs formed a natural choke point. Greyhawk steered toward the OUTCROP. Mrs. Hargrove frowned. "That's a dead end." "That's the point," Greyhawk replied, his voice low and calm, like a man who had already seen the fight in his mind. As they neared the choke point, he stood up on the moving wagon, pulling his bow from his back. His muscles tensed as he nocked an arrow, feeling the familiar weight and pull of the bowstring. The mules slowed as the canyon closed in tight, the wagon wedged between two stone walls. "Out," he said. Mrs. Hargrove didn't hesitate. She climbed down with surprising agility for her age, crouching behind a boulder. Greyhawk hopped off the wagon and took position behind a slab of red rock, scanning the riders charging in. The first outlaw rounded the bend, rifle raised. Greyhawk's arrow flew before the man could even pull the trigger, striking the wooden stock of his gun and sending it clattering to the ground. The second rider tried to flank him, but Mrs. Hargrove's voice rang out, "Duck!" Greyhawk dropped instantly, and her old shotgun roared, the sound booming through the canyon. The shot clipped the bandit's shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. The outlaws hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Greyhawk to fire. Two more arrows in quick succession. One struck a horse's bridle, forcing it to rear. The other embedded in the canyon wall inches from another rider's head, a warning that he was in a fight far beyond his skill. But the lead outlaw didn't retreat. He spurred his horse forward, a massive revolver in hand. Greyhawk stepped into the open, letting the man focus on him. The outlaw's arm rose, but before he could aim, Mrs. Hargrove, standing tall behind her boulder, cocked her shotgun with a click that echoed like a death sentence. "You best think hard about how much you like breathin'," she said. The leaders' eyes darted between them, the warrior with the bow and the old woman with a deadly aim. He spat into the dust and wheeled his horse around. The others followed, their retreat marked by curses and the fading thunder of hooves. The canyon grew quiet again, save for the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Greyhawk turned to Mrs. Hargrove. "You shoot like you've done it all your life," he said. "I have," she replied simply, reloading her shotgun. "Now help me back on that wagon before they think about coming back." As they climbed aboard, Greyhawk couldn't shake the thought someone had sent those men. They weren't just chasing for the thrill. There was a purpose, and it had everything to do with the papers he'd signed back in that courthouse. The riders came fast. Hooves slammed against the dry earth, sending plumes of red dust into the canyon's narrow air. The echoes of their yells bounced off the stone walls like war drums. Red Elk tightened his grip on the bow, his bare chest rising and falling with measured breaths. Every muscle poised for action. Beside him, Martha, her face carved with 70 years of wind, grit, and stubbornness, crouched low, the shotgun barrels gleaming in the sunlight. Her hand shook only slightly. "You take the left side. I'll take the ones dumb enough to ride straight into the kill box," she muttered. Not looking at him, Red Elk's sharp eyes flicked between the shadows ahead and the advancing dust cloud. "When I tell you to move, you move," he said in a tone that wasn't asking. The canyon was a trap by design, narrow enough that only two riders could pass at a time, wide enough that Red Elk had space to draw and loose arrows before they reached him. Behind them, the mules brayed nervously, their eyes rolling white. The first rider burst through the dust bandana over his face, rifle in hand. Red Elk's arrow flew before the man could raise it, striking the wooden stock and sending it spinning away. The man's horse reared, nearly throwing him. Before he could regain control, Martha's shotgun thundered. The boom echoed like a cannon blast, and the rider toppled sideways, hitting the dirt-hard. Another came, then another. Red Elk's arms moved like a machine draw, Release, draw, release each arrow finding a mark, a gun hand, a shoulder, a body. Rain. He wasn't aiming to kill unless he had no choice. Every shot was meant to slow them, stop them, send them into panic. Martha wasn't so forgiving. Her shots cracked like lightning in a dry storm, each one dropping a man or forcing his horse to veer off. She reloaded with surprising speed, her wrinkled face set in stone. The riders began to hesitate. A few pulled back to the edge of the canyon, shouting to one another. The leader, a tall man with a black hat and silver concos down his vest, rode forward. His voice carried over the din. "Red Elk, this ain't your fight. Step aside and we'll take what we came for." Martha barked out a laugh that was almost feral. "You want what I got, you're going to have to ride over my dead body, you vulture." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Old woman, you're testing my patience." "That's all right," she shot back. "I've been testing men's patience. For 70 years, you're nothing special." Red Elk kept his bow drawn, arrow trained on the leader's heart. "You won't leave here alive if you try," he said quietly, but with such finality that the canyon seemed to hold its breath. Leader's jaw worked. He knew this warrior's reputation, stories of raids stopped cold, of bounty hunters who never returned. But greed had a way of making men reckless. He signaled. 4 riders spurred forward in unison, determined to break through. Red Elk's arrows flew, Martha's shotgun boomed, and chaos erupted. Horses screamed, men cursed, dust choked the air. One rider made it close enough to swing a rifle like a club, but Red Elk caught him mid-swing, yanking him from the saddle and sending him crashing into the canyon wall. The fight lasted minutes but felt like hours. When the dust began to settle, the ground was littered with dropped weapons, groaning men, and one dead horse. The rest of the gang had turned tail, disappearing. Into the desert's shimmering horizon, Martha spat into the dirt. "Well, that'll keep them off us for a day or two." Red Elk retrieved his arrows, his face unreadable. "No, they'll come back, and next time they won't be so careless." She looked at him with the hint of a grin. "Guess it's a good thing I accidentally married you then." He didn't smile back. His eyes scanned the canyon walls. "We need to move before the sun drops. I smell trouble coming." And in the Old West, Red Elk's instincts were never wrong. The air was heavy with the coppery scent of blood and the acrid sting of gunpowder. Echoes of the last shot still clung to the canyon walls as silence settled, broken only by the labored breathing of the warrior and the old woman. Eagle Wolf lowered his bow, the taut leather grip leaving red marks across his palm. His eyes scanned the dust-choked trail behind them, searching for movement. None came. The last of the bounty riders had either fled or lay sprawled in the dirt. Old May, her wiry frame bent but unbroken, leaned on her shotgun and spat into the dust. "Well," she said, her voice a gravelly drawl, "I reckon that's one way to spend a honeymoon." Eagle Wolf gave her a side glance, not entirely sure whether to grimace or smirk. The corners of his mouth twitched just barely. "You fight better than most young men I've seen. Don't you forget it, boy." She coughed once, then shouldered the shotgun. "Now let's see if we can salvage any of their horses. I've been needing a fresh one since '78. They moved down the canyon, stepping over the sprawled figures. The ground was littered with broken arrows, fallen hats, and the glint of dropped coins. May knelt beside one of the dead and rifled his pockets without a hint of shame. "What?" she said when she caught Eagle Wolf watching her. "These men came to kill us. Least we can do is make their wallets useful." He said nothing. His gaze turned skyward, watching a hawk circle lazily against the burning blue. Something in that bird's freedom made his chest ache, not from the fight, but from the strange path life had taken since signing that cursed paper. By the time they reached the mouth of the canyon, The sun had dipped lower, spilling golden fire over the land. They had 3 horses now, 2 from the bounty hunters and 1 of May's stubborn old mares. May swung into the saddle with the ease of someone half her age. "Well, husband," she said with a mischievous glint in her eye, "what now? Back to town so you can file for an annulment? Or do we take this partnership and make the best of it?" Eagle Wolf's jaw tightened. Town meant questions. Questions meant lies. Lies meant trouble. And trouble was something they both already had. More than enough of. "Town will wait," he said finally. "First we go to Willow Creek." Her brow furrowed. "Willow Creek? Ain't nothing there but a busted church and an old trading post." He met her gaze. "That's what you think." 2 days later. They rode into Willow Creek under the weight of a dry wind. The buildings stood like skeletons, half swallowed by sand. But the church still held its bones upright, and inside, beneath the rotting floorboards, Eagle Wolf uncovered what he had been hiding for years, a stash of rifles, ammunition, and food stores meant for his people. May whistled low. Well, I knew you weren't just a pretty face. The weapons were not for sale, nor for display, they were for survival. And now, with the bounty riders gone, there would be more men, more blood, and more reason to fight. When the night came, they sat by the church steps, firelight painting, their faces in gold and shadow. May's eyes were softer now, though her voice was still iron. "Guess you and me are in this together whether we like it or not." Eagle Wolf stared into the flames, the crackle echoing the quiet promise building in his mind. "Then we fight together." And so it was settled, not with a handshake, not with a kiss, but with the unspoken bond forged in fire and blood. Warrior and a 70-year-old widow, bound by mistake, but destined to stand side by side against whatever hell the Old West could throw at them. Far off in the dark, a coyote howled, and the 2 of them sat in silence, knowing the real battle was yet to come.